Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Dwayne Sion, and I'm the marketing strategist for IaaS at SherWeb. SherWeb is your one-stop shop for a full range of IT solutions, such as high-performance cloud servers, cloud databases, hosted exchange, Office 365, and collaboration tools. Today, we are presenting how to build your Azure offering, presented by Eric Beauchamp from SherWeb and Vadim Vladimirsky from Nerdio. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. I may bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. Also, at the end of the presentation, we'll be offering something special to all attendees, so stay tuned and look forward to that. Today, our webinar, How to Build Your Azure Offering, will cover your IaaS opportunity, how to approach cloud migration, how SherWeb simplifies your journey, Nerdio for Azure, how Nerdio works with SherWeb and Azure, and why MSPs are choosing to use SherWeb with Nerdio. And also, we'll actually have our Q&A session right after that. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Eric Beauchamp. He is our SherWeb product director for IaaS. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dwayne, and welcome everyone to this webinar on building your Azure offering. So in the past 20 years, SherWeb developed an extensive experience helping partners with the migration of their customers to the cloud. More specifically, infrastructure as a service, including Azure, was added to SherWeb's portfolio several years ago. And since then, it became a key pillar of SherWeb's continued growth. So we'll begin today by looking at how you can capture the opportunity with your customers today. So Dwayne, I will just need the actual control of the slides, please. Or you can move to the next one. All right, thank you. So in terms of opportunity, there's a lot of numbers that are provided on the growth of infrastructure as a service. One of them from Gartner is the fact that it will reach about $72 billion by 2021. And the most interesting aspect of this is actually how it will take a shift from the traditional infrastructure, mostly on-prem right now, and going to the cloud. So if we look at the end of this year, it's about 1/3 in the cloud, which leaves a huge opportunity for the 2/3 here. And as we go further in just a couple of years, this will have reversed. And so the opportunity within the next 3 or 4 years is actually significant. So this being said, what kind of opportunity can you use today and really short term for migrating your customers to the cloud? One of them is the actual end of support for Server 2008, so SQL Server and Windows Server as well. Since the end of support is nearing, and we know that many applications and business apps are running on those and won't have time to be updated in time, there's an interesting Microsoft initiative where you can get 3 more years of free security updates if you migrate them to Azure. So this is an example that you can use today with your customers to take advantage of this. So in terms of the migration itself, so Azure Site Recovery is one of the options you could use to migrate them. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, if you look more on the more recent services, whether it's IoT, whether it's advanced analytics and machine learning, many opportunities there too. So probably not your typical customer base. Maybe you have 1 or 2 businesses that are using this or that will be using this, but it is happening for real. And the opportunities for the cloud infrastructure there is growing as well. So if we talk about the migration itself, in terms of the drivers that you can use with your customers, so for sure the hardware upgrades is one of the main ones. When the physical server is end of life, is an opportunity for you to suggest and propose that migration. Same for the software license renewals, as we just saw. But the main benefit that is actually seen by customers when trying to convince them to switch is actually in terms of the cost savings that they will experience, and as well as the increased availability and scalability of running them in the cloud. Now, in terms of the actual phases, the lift and shift is making 80% of those migrations. So just rehosting servers as is, which is the simplest and fastest approach. But from there, you will optimize and modernize the workloads running on the hosted servers. So the migration itself has three main phases. The assessment, where you will really build the inventory and understand dependencies between applications and workloads. And then the migration itself and optimization, which will allow really to reduce costs and make sure that you're using and leveraging everything available in terms of the new services there. All right, so working with SherWeb for that journey, what it means, really the help that you will get is first on how to resell them with our pre-sales team and your account managers here, which have extensive experience and material to help you work with your customers to perform that migration, plan it, and sell it. One thing you can opt for as well is to add the optional managed services. So let's say that in some cases you want to focus more on the business side and not as much as the updates and antivirus and such, and just want to mark up those items. It's something that SherWeb can do for you as part of the migration here. So one reason why the expertise of SherWeb with migration is there is the fact that the Performance Cloud offering, which has been there for 5 years, over 4 data centers, has allowed the staff here to really build the type of expertise that translates into offering Azure as well. So when you speak to the solutions architect here and the sysadmins, they have done thousands of migrations already, and what you will benefit from this expertise part of the migration. And one thing that over those years that SherWeb really has been proposing and suggesting is the fact that for this to be profitable, it has to be simple. So in the case of our cloud offering, so Performance Cloud, it's something that through the interface, you can really quickly create a server using a wizard in just a few steps, selecting the proper packages, and you're good to go to deploy your server. So that's a simple way to do it with Performance Cloud. Now, when you transition to Azure, Azure itself, simplicity is not the first word that will come to mind. It's really more about it's exhaustive. It is super flexible. You have close to 200 services, but you cannot say it's simple to spin an IT environment. In terms of the number of resources, configuration you have to do, and setting all up in the Azure portal, it's something that is lengthy and complex and can be costly if you do not take the time to also optimize your resources, making sure that you use just the right amount. So on that front, and as part of SherWeb's mission to simplify the cloud, we recently partnered with Nerdio, as we believe that they offer a centralized management platform that is a game changer in building an Azure offering, making it really simple, streamlined, automated. And so this is the opportunity today in this webinar for you to see it in action, understand what it does, and how it can really help you as part of building your offering. So I will now turn it back to Dwayne for introducing Vadim from Nerdio.
Thank you very much, Eric. And now we'll continue with our second presenter, Vadim Vadamirski, who's the CEO of Nerdio. Please tell us about yourself and Nerdio, please.
Thanks, Dwayne and Eric. Thank you for the introduction. We are very excited to be partnering with SherWeb and helping your partners build and grow a successful Azure practice through some of the automation that we are providing partners. And what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes at the beginning of the presentation to talk about how the background of the company, how the platform, the Nerdio platform came to be, and then spend the bulk of our time together actually showing you the product in action so you can see how it actually works, and how it can simplify many of the complex tasks associated with Azure. So with that, let me give you a quick background on the company. We actually started out as an MSP, almost 14 years ago in Chicago, and we developed what was a very unique practice back then. We started out with 100% complete IT in the cloud type of an environment using terminal services and RDS, and then eventually VDI technologies. And over many years, we've onboarded and migrated many hundreds of customers all around the world into this cloud model, with cloud obviously not being the term used back then. And over the years, as we built that practice, we realized that we've created a lot of technology internally for our own internal use to make ourselves more efficient as an MSP. And we decided to package it and create a platform and make it available to other MSPs who could build similar practices in their own respective regions. And that's how Nerdio was born, about 2.5, 3 years ago. We first deployed Nerdio as an automation platform on top of a private cloud that we were operating, which was based on the VMware stack of technologies. But as we started signing up and working with many partners around the country, the feedback we kept getting was that they really liked the automation and simplicity, but were looking to do something on top of public cloud rather than migrate customers from on-premises into a private cloud. And that was really the main impetus for us to create a version of our product specifically designed for Azure, and that really has been received very, very well by the MSP community, by Microsoft, and has had a lot of success since we launched it about 1.5 years ago. All right, perfect. So, as I mentioned, we started working with lots of MSPs all around the world, and what we realized is that MSPs, similar to the challenges that we saw internally, were really having kind of 3 main categories of challenges in adopting and using Azure to build their IT practices. And the first one that we heard over and over again was that it's just more expensive, or it's too expensive compared to the alternatives. The people say that if you take an IT environment and compare to hosting it either on-prem or in a private cloud or a data center to running it in Azure, it's really a lot more expensive to do so in Azure. And you also need fairly specialized and expensive engineering talent, people who are familiar with all of the various components of the platform, and to find and retain and pay those people, it is fairly expensive endeavor. So that was probably the number one challenge that we saw in the market. The second component was the complexity, and this complexity comes in 2 flavors. One, it's the complexity of the Azure platform itself. It's extremely robust, as Eric mentioned, but simplicity is not the first, or probably one of the last words you will use to describe Azure, right? It's very robust. It has hundreds of SKUs, and the rate of change of the Azure products is just astronomical. It's very difficult to keep up with how the platform is evolving from a technology perspective. The Azure Management Portal was really initially designed for DevOps, and IT administration and IaaS and infrastructure as a service sort of management was added later on, making it a fairly difficult IT administration platform to use. So that's the technology complexity. There's also the pricing complexity. MSPs are generally used to pricing things on a predictable fixed cost or a licensed up basis. But with Azure and other public clouds, the challenge is that it's priced based on consumption, and consumption is very difficult to predict. So there's lots of complexity around building solutions that are based on Azure because of the pricing complexity that's involved. And then finally, the third category of challenges is the perceived risk of building a practice and moving customers into Azure. First of all, as we mentioned, a lot of MSPs customers expect fixed pricing, and they really don't want to take on any of the risk of running an on-demand or usage or based pricing type of a system. They want it to be predictable and something they can budget for. And if an MSP doesn't properly price out and estimate and quote a solution that's based on Azure, and then those costs end up exceeding what they've estimated, that eats into their margin and creates a significant amount of risk in building fixed pricing packages on top of Azure. And also we talked about these Azure experts that they're very much in demand today, and the risk is if you have somebody who's building Azure environments or a group of engineers that are building Azure environments for customers manually, if those people leave the organization, it's very challenging to continue managing those customers given that the environment is so complex. So with Nerdio for Azure, we set out to solve those challenges. And the goal that we have is to simplify and accelerate the transition and management of customers' IT environments in Azure. And we do that in four ways, four kind of primary top-level ways. Number one is we help with both automation and best practices on pricing and packaging an Azure-based IT offering. So number one is we have a total cost estimator that instead of, for those of you who are familiar with the Azure price calculator, instead of having to design an architecture and know which SKUs to select and which servers to use and how to price storage and things like that, it asks very high-level business information in the cost estimator and then creates a design of an IT environment and provides a breakdown of all of the costs associated with running it, not just the Azure consumption, but also things like Office 365 and RDS licensing and anything else that may be involved in offering that service. And now we have also launched very recently a feature called Plans Designer, which I'll show you in a bit, that allows MSPs to create kind of SaaS-type packages of IT infrastructure based on Azure and publish them to their website. So they're very clean and easy to understand for customers to be able to then have a conversation about offering them an infrastructure bundle that includes all the various components. So I'll show that to you in just a few minutes. Once you have pricing and packaging worked out, the next big challenge is provisioning. And provisioning means building out a complete IT environment from start to finish in Azure. And having done many hundreds of these deployments, an engineer that is very experienced would normally spend 2 to 3 weeks standing up a complete IT environment and doing the migration if everything has to be done manually. What we've been able to do in the Nerdio for Azure automation is we've created templates and standardized them in such a way that you do not need an engineer at all. You can simply go in and provision a new environment within 2 hours and without any involvement of an engineer. And again, I will show you what that looks like in just a minute. The next step is once you've provisioned this environment, it's been automatically stood up, it's perfectly tuned and is consistent from one customer to the other, you now have a single place where you need to manage not just all of the customers that you have running in Azure, but also all the various IT components of an environment. So what the Nerdio admin portal allows our partners to do is have a multi-tenant management portal where they can see all of their customer deployments, and then within each deployment they can manage not just the Azure components like infrastructure, but they can manage Office 365 and Exchange Online, backup and DR, users and groups, security, VPNs, networking, and again, you'll see it in a few minutes, but it's a full scope IT management platform with all of the technology running in the Microsoft Cloud. And then the final component is this cost optimization, which really makes Azure an affordable environment, an affordable system to use to host an SMB or a corporate type of an IT environment. Because without it, as we mentioned, the very first objection was the fact that Azure is just too expensive. So Nerdio for Azure provides lots of auto-scaling options that can take environments and based on predicted user demand, can size them up and down depending on when there is activity on the systems. And again, I'll show that to you in just a little bit. Some of the common use cases for the technology, probably the most popular one is the one we call IT as a service. This is a scenario where you have a customer and you want to do a full migration of the entire IT stack from on-premises into Azure. The goal is to try to eliminate as much of the local infrastructure as possible. And the approach here is kind of take everything as is and move things into the Azure environment, give everyone a virtual desktop, and let users use all of their existing applications like they're used to. In larger environments that already have maybe an RDS deployment, but that RDS deployment may be serving users who are far away from the data center where the deployment is, Azure offers a perfect ability to place the compute capacity for all of these desktops closer to the end users. So we allow those types of customers to extend their existing environment into an Azure subscription and then migrate or extend their RDS deployment into Azure and spread it across various regions, bringing it closer to the end customers. Desktop as a service is another common use case where somebody may not want to move the entire IT stack and may not want to move any of the databases or applications or servers, but does want to leverage desktop virtualization and use VDI or maybe use GPUs. This allows them to spin up a Azure deployment that has desktops in it that will tie back into an existing IT environment somewhere else in another cloud, on premises, or in the data center, and then be able to operate those two in a connected, kind of a hybrid fashion. And then finally, the line of business service use case is where somebody wants to migrate just their servers. Maybe they're up for a refresh, maybe they need to be upgraded for some reason, and they don't really want to touch their desktops. There maybe the desktops are recently refreshed, or they are happy with physical desktops and laptops. They just want to manage. They just want to use Azure for managing, backing up, and securing their server workloads. And then Nerdio for Azure allows for that use case as well, where you can connect the two environments, extend the network and the directory from on-prem into Azure, and then migrate servers in a phase and approach from an on-prem environment into Azure. So just to illustrate kind of where Nerdio fits into the IT stack, I'll use the IT as a service use case as an example. If you think about any SMB IT environment, or really any IT environment, it has these 5 core technology components. You have the desktop at the core, and this could be a physical desktop, a virtual desktop, a Mac, a PC, what have you. But it is the environment that the end user uses to interact with their data and applications. You then have your servers, things like Active Directory and file servers, print servers, databases, etc. You have a productivity and collaboration in the form of Office 365. You have security, which is things like antivirus and content filtering and two-factor authentication and encryption, all of those things. And finally, backup and DR. And then most MSPs will generally take those off-the-shelf technologies, either from a company like Microsoft or from maybe some other vendors. They'll package them together and they will offer their services on top of that set of technologies. Things like support and monitoring, IT strategy consulting, maybe line of business development and support, etc. Where Nerdio fits in is sort of in between the technology stack and the MSP services. It is a software management layer that stitches together all the technology and IT components that are running in the Microsoft cloud, provisions them, manages them, and optimizes them as a unit. Okay, I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but this is an example of when I talk about provisioning a system, I don't mean just creating a subscription or spinning up a VM and saying, here you go, now get everything else set up. I mean building an entire IT environment, everything from the low-level networking, segmenting the network into a LAN and a DMZ, setting up the necessary firewall and access rules at the networking layer, spinning up Active Directory with group policy, DNS, and DHCP, multi-factor authentication, spinning up file services, doing ADFS integration with Office 365, enabling Azure Recovery Services for backup and DR, setting up RDS deployment and VDI golden image deployment. All of that happens completely automatically, and the system is ready to go in 2 hours after you submit the provisioning job. Looks like I lost control. Apologize 1 second. My apologies. I don't have control anymore. Dwayne, if you can maybe enable that for me. Okay, there we go. Looks like we got it. Okay, perfect. So, having said all that, right, the challenges with Azure, what Nerdio does to help solve those challenges, what are some of the outcomes? What are some of the reasons MSPs use SherWeb and Nerdio for Azure? So if you think about what Nerdio for Azure does, it enables a very natural and robust use case for Azure, which is delivering the same set of services that you're already delivering to your customers, except leveraging the public cloud to do so. So that leads to an expanded contribution margin. So instead of selling maybe an Office 365 license for a few points of margin, you're able to package everything together and then realize a margin of 40 to 60% on a per user basis. And it also makes Azure just an affordable platform to begin with because of all of the auto scaling and cost optimization that we mentioned earlier. Okay, thank you for switching that slide. So the next component here is the operational impact. Due to all of the standardization and automation that Nerdio has, it lowers the cost of service delivery. It also eliminates a lot of the mistakes that are typically made in the process of managing IT environments, maybe adding users, going through checklists. All of those things are fully automated. And it lets MSPs leverage their tier 1 and tier 2 help desk resources to do the kinds of things that they currently have to leverage an Azure engineer for. So you'll see what the management platform looks like, but it allows for very easy and simple to use environment with different roles that lower level resources can use to manage almost the entire IT stack. Okay, go to the next slide, please. And then finally, it leads to better customer success because everything is packaged in one service: infrastructure, Office 365 licensing, support, and various other services. It creates a very sticky relationship with customers that's obviously long-lasting, with MSP becoming the single source provider for all of these components. It also leads to better end user experience because there are fewer break and fix issues and less downtime because everything is standardized and running in a world-class hosting facility with Azure. And it gives users a very consistent access and experience regardless of the device they're on, because in most deployments there is a virtual desktop that's published to the users, or maybe an application that gets published to them. So their experience from working from home or working from a laptop or working from the office is exactly the same. Okay, and now let's actually take a look at the product and see how it looks in real life. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is we are logged in as a partner administrator, right? So this is what an MSP would see when they first log into the Nerdio admin portal. They would see a list of all of their customer accounts, and this is where they would add a new Nerdio for Azure account. So I want to show you what that process looks like and how this provisioning works. So if you wanted to add a new customer, you would go to Add NFA Account, and there are 3 steps here. Step number 1 is to connect to an existing Azure account that has a subscription that you can provision this into. So you click Connect to Azure. It will take you to Microsoft's authentication page. You would type in the credentials that would allow access into the system. It would then allow you to select the subscription if there are multiple in their account. It lets you select a geographic region where Azure has presence, and you can then select this to be in the US and Canada, or many other. I think they have about 50 or so right now around the world, so you can provision this anywhere you want. You can then specify a name of a resource group if you'd like. Optionally, it will default to Nerdio resource group, but you can give a resource group based on the customer's name, and you can select whether or not you want to use Azure hybrid usage, which is something that customers that already own the Windows operating system, Windows Server operating system, and have software assurance don't have to rent it again from Azure. They can just bring their own. So that's step number one, kind of make a handful of selections here. Step number two is doing exactly the same thing with Office 365. You connect to Office 365 account, same thing, go in, type in the credentials, give the application access. This may be the same Office 365 account as the Azure account, could be the same Azure AD tenant, or they could be completely independent. Most customers will obviously have Office 365 already, so Nerdio will perfectly integrate with an existing Office 365 deployment. We'll use the same licenses, we'll be able to see all of the same data and user information, so it's going to be very seamless from an end user perspective. And then finally, the third step is just giving this company a name so you can identify it in the list, and selecting from one of two plans. We have an enterprise plan, which is a full-featured version of Nerdio for Azure, which is what we're going to be looking at today. But we also have a plan called Professional. This is really designed for environments that have 25 or fewer employees, that need 25 or fewer desktops, and it comes pre-packaged in very defined templates. So you can have a P5 template, which is meant for up to 5 users, P15 and P25. It tells you up here exactly how many cores will be needed. And if you mouse over here, it's going to actually tell you what the approximate cost per month is going to be, and what's included in each template. And on our website, you can actually go in and see the exact specs of each and every one of these templates. So once you type in this information, you connect it to Azure and Office 365, click Save. The account will show up on this screen with the status of provisioning, and then a couple hours later, it will be active. You'll be able to click Login and start managing that account. So I'm not going to provision one now. We don't have 2 hours to watch it, so I'm going to show you what a previously provisioned account looks like. I'm going to click on Login to the right of this account ID 5009. And what you'll notice is that my menu context has switched. So I'm now no longer looking at the world as a partner administrator where I can add additional customer accounts. I am now looking at it from the role of an IT administrator, and you can see on the left here, I have various menus to manage the various components of the IT environment. There's lots of things that you can do here. I'm just going to point out a handful of things. I'm going to go into users and show you what the user list looks like. So this looks like kind of a regular user list, but if you look closely, you'll see that this brings information together from multiple underlying systems. You can see the Office 365 license that's assigned to this user. So this happens to have an E3 and the Visio license assigned. You can see the Active Directory username and Active Directory group membership of this user. You can see their Exchange Online email address. You can also see what kind of desktop they have. So this user happens to have a VDI desktop that has a single core and 3.5 gigs of RAM. You can see the last time the user logged in, and you can quickly disable the user's desktop login just from one click here. And then next to this user, you have a whole set of other actions you can take, things that are very common when managing cloud environments and RDS and the VDI environment. So you can obviously do things like reset password, you can reset the desktop, you can shut the desktop down if it's not being used, you can revert the user's Windows profile from a backup using shadow copy. So this will automatically enumerate all the versions of the shadow copies in the profile available and perform that restore for you. So you never even have to log into the desktop or touch it. It will do that for you completely automatically. You can revert the desktop to its golden image state. So if the user gets a virus or does something that corrupts their machine, you can revert it back to the golden image. You can also view the user's performance. You can forward their email. You can assign another user to monitor their email, etc. For instance, let's say this employee, Andy, is leaving the organization. And normally you would need to figure out who gets their email, who gets their old email, their new email, who gets all of their data, what happens to their user account. And there's generally kind of an offboarding checklist that you would need to go through to properly offboard an employee. Let's see how that looks in Nerdio. You would go to Archive User. You would select the owner for this user's data, so somebody that has an Office 365 license. You would check this box and click Confirm. And what that will do is it will actually convert Andy's mailbox from a E3 to a shared mailbox to free up that license, and it will assign it to the manager so that it comes up in Outlook on the left-hand side automatically. It will take all of Andy's personal files like desktop and documents and put them in a folder on the file server called Disabled Users and drop a shortcut to that on the manager's desktop. It will disable the user's AD account. It will shut down the user's desktop. It will set the manager as the owner of any SharePoint and OneDrive data, and finally send an email to the manager outlining everything that was done and saying you now have access to Andy's data who has left the organization. So all of that will happen in just a couple of minutes after selecting one user and clicking Confirm. So you can see how much efficiency that introduces. Let's say you have a new employee starting in the organization. So how would you add a user to the environment? You click Add User down here. You specify, first name, last name. You can specify the email address and any additional aliases that you may want to add for that user. You can add as many as you want. If you type in a phone number in this field, this will automatically enable two-factor authentication for that user. So when they log into their desktop, they're going to be sent an SMS code, to type into the login prompt. It can tell how many licenses of what version of Office 365 is available. So it looks like we have one available E3, or actually two available E3 licenses. So we can assign it right from here. We can then decide whether we want this user to have access into this management portal. So imagine if John is going to be an IT administrator, we may want to give him either tier 1 support access where they can manage everything up until servers, but not networking and security and things like that. Or we can give them full access to the environment by making them an account IT administrator. And then they'll be able to use their regular Active Directory credentials to actually log into this environment and do all of this management that we're looking at. We can also grant the user domain admin rights from the screen right here if needed. Obviously, use that very judiciously. The next section is what kind of desktop do we want to assign to this new user? We can either assign them no desktop, maybe they don't need a virtual desktop at all. We can assign them an RDS session, and that session could either be on a select RDS session host or in an RDS collection, which may have multiple hosts and it may scale in and out depending on user load. Or we can assign the user a specific VDI desktop, which will be a dedicated VM, and you can choose from any VM size. And you'll notice some of these are grayed out, and if you mouse over, it will tell you why they're grayed out. For example, this one is a 32 core. It says you need 32 cores, but only 20 cores are available in the subscription. And this is an example of lots of these guardrails that we have created inside of Nerdio Admin Portal that protect you from making selections that Azure won't really like and will balk at and error out on. You can select the type of instance you want. You can select the type of disk. There are different types of disks. There's premium SSD, there's standard SSD, and standard HDD. You can select what type of disk to give the user. So let's say in this case, John is going to be a light RDS session user. Then you can go here, and if let's say John is joining the accounting department, you can start typing accounting. We see, okay, there is a user in accounting already. We click on the user, it will automatically pre-populate all of the security group membership, and then we can edit those further as needed. We can expand the extended attributes, and we can set, signature detail like, location information, login script. We can decide what organizational unit that user will be created in, etc. We can also decide if we want to hide the user from the GAL, enable OWA, all kinds of advanced things that don't always apply. And then the final step is a way to send an email to the user's personal email address so that they will get an email that looks like this. That's sort of a welcome email that shows them that they've been added to the system, gives them next steps on how to log in, how to change their password, how to set their default printer. And this will have an attached RDP file that they can simply double click on, and all they have to do is type in their password, and within 2 or 3 minutes of submitting that new user request, the user will be able to use the system with all the applications pre-installed, antivirus and backup enabled, everything ready to go. Okay, so let's go ahead, and it's obviously not the valid email address, so we're going to go ahead and click Save. It randomly generated a password for us. We're going to click OK, and now this has been submitted as a job that's going to take about 2 to 3 minutes to complete. Let's see what the end user experience is like. So let's say I'm Andy, or I'm the administrator, and I want to log in as that user. So I click on this Generate RDP button. I can decide what type of capabilities the users will have. Things like audio redirection, copy and paste capability, local printer redirection, access to local drives, microphone, etc. I can then decide to publish either the entire desktop or an individual application installed on that user's desktop. And if I click here, I get an option to select one of those applications. And then I can either download the file right here, or I can email the file to myself or to the user directly. So here I'm going to download the file. There it is, just came down in my browser. I'm going to click on it. And assuming I remember the password, if you remember the password, there we go. We're going to log in. And here is our virtual desktop. I'm logged in as Andy. If I open up, Word and Excel and Outlook, all of that is going to be pre-configured for me. The user is going to be fully logged in because there is single sign-on that's enabled by default. You can see that all of that is automated for me. Okay, so that is user management. Let me quickly show you a couple things on server management, and then I want to spend a few minutes on the cost estimator and the plans designer. So server management lets you manage all of the individual VMs, so things like domain controllers, file servers, various application servers, RDS session host, etc. To resize a VM, all you do is you click here, you select from one of the available VM sizes in that particular region where that VM is deployed, and you click confirm, and it does all of the work for you. So if, for instance, I have a 2-core, 4 GB machine, and I want it to be an 8-core machine, I just do this, click confirm, and everything happens automatically. I could also resize the storage. So for instance, I have this FSO1, which is a file server, and it has a data disk, which is a 128 GB premium SSD disk. If I want to resize it, all I do is I click on it. I then select another size that's same or larger. And if I leave this box checked right here, it will not only grow the virtual disk in Azure, but it's actually going to expand my Windows volume. So I don't even have to log into the file server to expand the partition. It's going to do that for me automatically. Let's say you have an application server that is that doesn't need to be sized that needs to be used during business hours, but not after hours. So what you can do is you can go here and go into auto scale. And what this will let you do is define the work hours for a particular VM and the action that should happen outside of those hours. So let's take this as an example. We have a 2-core VM that is used in production Monday through Friday, let's say 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, so for 12 hours, 5 days a week, solid central time. Now we tell the system, what do we want to have happen with that VM outside of those hours? We can obviously have it powered off, or we could actually have it resized from a dual core to a single core. Once we click confirm, this is going to create a schedule in Azure Automation that's going to automatically, right before 6 a.m. on Monday, powered on, and then right after 6 p.m., not powered on, size it up to 2 cores, and then right after 6 p.m., it's going to size it down to 1 core, and it's going to do so on this sort of schedule based on these work hours. So you can really optimize how much these VMs are running and at what size they're running, because the bigger the VM, obviously, the more it costs. The other thing to mention on this screen is this RDS collection capability. This RDS collection capability uses a feature of Azure called scale sets, where you can create an RDS collection with a flexible size that will respond in real time to the user demands. Okay, what do I mean by that? So let me go into Manage Auto Scale. There are 3 parameters, there are 3 sets of settings. You set the boundaries. how many minimum hosts do I want to have in this RDS collection? So obviously, let's, in this case, it's 1. How many, what's the maximum number of hosts? Let's say it's 5. And how many of these hosts do I want to be available sort of in standby, powered off, so they can power down very quickly? Okay, so let's say 1. Then there's scaling logic. And the scaling logic in this case says, if the average CPU utilization across all of these hosts exceeds 70% for 10 minutes or more, build me a new one. Add a new one to this collection automatically, obviously up to the maximum of 5. So the system will automatically keep adding hosts as users are logging in and the CPU utilization is growing until it either drops below the 70% or it hits the maximum. And then it can also scale in automatically. So this says if the CPU utilization across all the hosts drops below 40% for 20 minutes, and it's after business hours, let's say after 6 p.m., then start scaling in, meaning removing hosts, and it will do so until either it reaches this minimum or until the utilization sort of stays above that percentage. And then the third setting is a kind of a warning that you give the user. So you can say 10 minutes before a host gets scaled in or gets removed, send a message to all of the users on that host telling them that, hey, something is going to happen now, log off and log back on. Your session will be placed on another available host so that the host you're currently on can scale in to save money. And then the final piece that I want to mention on this screen is this golden image management. So I mentioned that Nerdio supports both RDS deployments and VDI deployments. In the VDI deployment, every user gets a dedicated virtual machine. So, and you can manage the golden image that serves as the image for that machine. So all you do is you power it on, you will then RDP into it, make any changes, come back in here, power it off, and then any new users that get created as VDI users will get an image, a desktop that's going to be cloned off of this golden image. Okay, let me switch gears for just a little bit and show you this plans designer that I mentioned briefly during the presentation. So this plans designer, the concept here is creating a pricing page that is designed with your terminology, your pricing, your costs, really custom to your business, and being able to publish it right on your website with your own branding and everything. So, we kind of preset a sample here, and you can see there's lots of options, lots of sections, but let me show you what it actually looks like when it's published to the website. So it's a page that looks like this. And again, everything here is fully configurable. You can have fewer or less sections, you can have more or less numbers of plans, you can change colors, you can change background images and text, all of that kind of stuff. But here's an example. Here's a pricing page for an MSP that wants to sell virtual desktops and Azure infrastructure with Office 365 and managed services. So there are these 5 sections. There's a managed desktop, there's Office 365, Azure infrastructure, help desk and support, and any additional add-ons. So there are 3 options to choose from under managed desktops. There's silver, gold, and platinum, and they have those types of features. There's 4 options of Office 365. Again, it could be more, it could be less. It's completely up to you. There are a few packages of Azure infrastructure. You can either have the professional plan that's pre-packaged in a template, or you can offer an enterprise plan that a user can simply click on estimate price, type in a few numbers here, just make a few selections, and then click confirm, and it will automatically estimate what that Azure price is going to be, list all the features. You can then decide how many help desk and support options you want to offer and what's included. Maybe there are different support hours, maybe there's different SLA, maybe there are different numbers of contacts that can be authorized to call support, and then any add-ons, so things like data loss prevention, maybe SQL Server, maybe virtual CIO, maybe cloud PBX, whatever you want. And then there could be a call to action that actually launches your contact us form that lets the user submit a request to be contacted based on this information. And you can go in and you can literally manage every single aspect of what I just showed you. You can say, okay, well, I don't want to sell 3 types of desktops. I only want to sell 2 types of desktops. So here we go. We just unchecked silver, and now we have only gold and platinum. you get the idea. You can have lots of flexibility there. The other thing I quickly want to go over, and then we'll switch over to take questions, is this cost estimator. And the cost estimator is really important in getting a grasp on what is an Azure deployed IT environment will cost under what scenario. It gives you lots of what if sort of things you can play with. So first step is selecting, okay, the use case, the IT as a service, which is a complete IT environment, line of business service, etc. And by selecting different options, you can see the selections will change. This is the most comprehensive one. This is the least comprehensive one. But let's start here. You get to put in how many desktop users, how many of them are going to be VDI, how many of them are going to be RDS. You can select the version of Nerdio, Enterprise or Professional. You can select how much aggregate storage you'll need, whether there will be additional database or application servers that you want to add into this estimate. Then you can say, okay, how many licenses of Office 365 am I going to include? How many licenses of RDS? And then other assumptions, things like, do we want to use reserved instances? You can say no, you can say 1 year or 3 year. You can decide whether you want to include backup in this estimate, whether you want to include VPN and hybrid Active Directory, RDS collections, all of the stuff that we talked about briefly. And finally, there is a section on cost assumptions that you can fill out and customize. And then once you click on View Costs, it will create an Azure deployment. It will show you exactly what types of VMs it will use and what type of storage and data it will have, what the reserved instance assumptions are, what the Azure cost is going to be, and what the various subcomponents are that make up this total cost. So it really makes it very easy. Within a few minutes, you can ask the customer some high-level technical questions about their environment and have a fully designed Azure quote that you can then decide, okay, I'm gonna, my cost is gonna be, let's say, $38 per user. So I'm going to double that or maybe even more, and I'm gonna sell it for, let's say, $100 per user or $75 per user, etc. So, that's all the time we have for the demo. I'd like to see if there are any questions and be more than happy to answer any questions that the audience may have about this.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eric and Vadim. I just want to mention something that we actually have an offer that we want to do today, so that if anyone who types in the word demo in the chat, what we'll do, we'll actually book you a customized demo that can actually show you the benefits of actually working with SherWeb and Nerdio for Azure. So it's going to be a customized demo, which means everyone's demo would be different and catered to your business needs. So type in DEMO in the chat panel and we'll set you up with a demo ASAP. So now we'll go ahead into take some questions. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. Okay, so it looks like we got a few questions here. I got a question from Jenny. This one would be for you, Vadim. How can you figure out how much the Azure consumption is going to cost?
Great question. Yeah, so the NFA cost estimator, which is the very last thing I showed, is really a great, starting and even the finishing place for getting that estimate. You can get very accurate numbers from there, and then you'll know based on the configuration what the cost is going to be, and you can play with the various what-if scenarios. You can ask a question like, hey, what if I go from reserved instance for 1 year and I decide to commit to 3 years? How much per month is that going to change, my numbers? Or what if I want to bring, what if the customer owns their Windows Server license versus renting it from Azure? You can just check, yes and no checkboxes that we saw on the other screen, and that will give you a very accurate estimate of what that cost is going to be.
Okay, great. I got another question from Mark. What if the customer already has Office 365 or Azure?
So that's actually the typical case, at least with Office 365. In the vast majority of cases, customers already are using at least Exchange Online, sometimes even many other Office 365 products. So Nerdio will integrate and plug into the existing deployment. It will see all of those users and their licenses, and it will allow you to import them and assign them to desktops. So you don't have to do any Office 365 migration. You don't have to really disrupt anything the customer is already doing. They don't have to reconfigure the way they're accessing their current mailboxes, etc. As far as Azure goes, if a customer already has Azure, that's not something that Nerdio can plug into today. Well, it can use the same subscription in the same account, but if there are already VMs provisioned, those would need to be moved into from whatever subscription or resource group they're in right now into the newly provisioned Nerdio resource group in Azure, and then Nerdio will pick them up. So you provision a brand new Azure deployment, and then you can take existing Azure VMs and other workloads and move them into that newly provisioned deployment, and the Nerdio admin portal will be able to see and manage them.
Okay, great. I got a question for you, Eric. This one's from Zach. I'm a SherWeb partner. What is the pricing? Is it per user, and is there a minimum?
All right. So the actual pricing is per user as defined in Nerdio itself, and then there's no minimum. No.
Okay, perfect. I think this is one more question we got. This one would be for Vadim. I think it's coming from Jay. How is this different from Windows Virtual Desktop that was recently announced?
Great. Yeah. So Windows Virtual Desktop is actually something that will be part of Nerdio. Once it goes into general availability. We've been working with Microsoft on testing and testing that platform. So Windows Virtual Desktop is an alternative to RDS. It has a couple of major technological innovations, one of which is instead of having to use a server operating system that has what's called desktop experience on it that makes it look like Windows 10, Windows 10 will now have multi-user capability, so multiple users can leverage Windows 10 at the same time, just like they are able to do with RDS. So that's something that Nerdio will support as a deployment model. So when you saw me going through the provisioning, when I was adding a new account, I didn't have an option for Windows Virtual Desktop because that's not yet released. But in the future, you'll be able to make a choice whether you want to deploy a traditional RDS type of a deployment, or if you want to leverage the Windows Virtual Desktop, and it will still automate the deployment, the management, the auto scaling of those VMs. It will still do all of that management for you, just like it does in the RDS environment.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we're coming to the close of our webinar. I just wanted to give you guys any opportunity to say anything else. Eric, if there's anything else you would like to say.
No, I just would like to thank everyone for attending. A very interesting presentation by Vadim, and as you saw, this is really a great solution, and already we have some partners using it since the last few months, and we're getting great feedback on this. So.
Awesome, that's great. And Vadim, would you have any closing statements before we go?
Yeah, just want to encourage everyone to come on our website, take a look. We have in-depth videos that show other functionality that we didn't have time to get to on this call. Play with the cost estimator to get a sense of how an environment will look in Azure. And a lot of partners that haven't really played with Azure have a perception of it being more expensive. Once they play with the cost estimator and they see how affordable and how much room there is for margin for them in that type of an offer, they're very pleasantly surprised. So I encourage everyone to take a look and then reach out to your SherWeb team to set up that demo that Dwayne was talking about for your organization. And thanks again for everyone's time.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. As I mentioned earlier, we are offering a free personalized demo from SherWeb and Nerdio. All you need to do is type in demo in the control panel, and our reps will contact you and set up a demo just for you. I encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity, and thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.